All right, well, again, we welcome everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Jared, of course. I'm the technical support here at Miracle Software. Of course, I've worked with many of you on the phone, and just wanted to let you know today we're going to be covering some of the configuration for ICD-10 in Medisoft. So not a training necessarily on ICD-10 in of itself, but really we're going to focus in on how to configure Medisoft in preparation for ICD-10. And if you've been in chat with me in times past, especially if you've upgraded Medisoft recently, some of this we may have covered in brief after we upgraded you. But certainly we'll go into a little bit more detail. We ask that all hold their questions to the end of the webinar. We also have on the line Kay Warden from Premier Billing Solutions, and she might be able to answer any specific questions you might have on ICD-10. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can as well, especially on the Medisoft side. Now, if you do need some more specific training after the webinar, you feel like more might be needed to get familiar with ICD-10. We're not necessarily affiliated with any organizations, but you can do some different online searches for training that's out there. There's different courses, certainly even if for different specialties there exists training. So I encourage that you pursue some of that information as well. Lastly, if you have an urgent question or even at the end of the meeting have a question, you can always unmute yourself, especially if you have if you're at a computer, you hover your mouse down to the bottom, you should have a little panel and you can see a little microphone icon. And if you click or unclick that, that'll help mute or unmute yourself. So we'll begin here now. Most of you, no doubt, are Medisoft users and familiar with the program. Of course, to be ICD-10 compliant, you need to have a compatible version of Medisoft. And many of you have that. So a compatible version of Medisoft would be version 19, which came out last year, or version 20, which came out recently this year. So if you're not on one of these versions and you hope to be ICD-10 compatible, you definitely would want to upgrade Medisoft. And I'll pull up a little slide at the end of the presentation too for some contact information if you have questions about that. You should see my screen here being shared and Medisoft open up. And I'm currently using version 20, but if you have Medisoft version 19, you should see the exact same thing that I'll be going through here. All right, so one of the first things we want to do if you're trying to get compliant and set up with Medisoft, ICD-10 and Medisoft, we're going to want to get the codes into the program. If we go to your list of diagnostic codes in the program now, so I'm going to click on lists at the top and then select diagnostic codes. You're going to notice, of course, many of you already have been using for years Medisoft. You have all your ICD-9 codes in the software. So, of course, you could manually come down here and click New and technically enter in the ICD-10 code and description one by one, but we don't recommend that. Medisoft has a really nice tool that looks at all of the existing equivalent or existing ICD-9 codes in the software, and the ICD-10 program I'm about to show you, or converter tool I'm about to show you, will bring in all of the related codes automatically for ICD-10. So I'm just going to show you how that works really quick. At the top of Medisoft, we're going to click on Tools. I'm going to select Services, and then Create ICD-10 Mappings. So this is a really nice tool. As I mentioned, only available in version 19 and 20, but it essentially takes the 9 codes that you have in the software and creates the ICD-10 version of those codes for you. And it breaks that up into 2 steps. The first step is what's called one-to-one mappings. So I've got a couple in here, codes that we have not yet mapped to an ICD-10 code. So what the one-to-one mappings means is that we have one ICD-9 code that this tool detects will just become one ICD-10 code. And we can continue. If you have a whole list of these, you can either hit the Select All button, and it'll actually select all of your codes if you had many, many in here. And in one fell swoop, you could say create selected code by clicking that button at the bottom. And what that's going to do, we'll look at it in a second, but it's actually going to insert in your diagnostic code list this ICD-10 code that we see here. So 1-to-1. So I'm just going to hit create selected code. Now we have the second step, which is kind of like a one-to-many mapping. It's called other mappings. But we might have one ICD-9 code here, 847.0, and if I click on it, we're going to notice at the bottom there's now several variations of that code in the ICD-10 world. So we see here it could be one of these two. And most likely, as you go through this list, if you create new codes, you put new codes in Medisoft and are continuing to add ICD-10 codes, you're going to probably want to bring all of these in. And that's what I'm going to do for our purposes today. I'm just going to say create these additional codes, and we'll see how that turned out. So I'm going to close out of this little tool. It does a really nice job bringing in and saving a lot of time than having to manually enter in those codes. So if I go into list diagnosis codes here, by default, all of your 9 codes tend to show up at the top, as you can see here. But the second we start scrolling further down, we're going to run into the 10 codes that would have been created in using that tool. We also have a way at the top right of hiding the 9 codes or hiding the display of them. So I could simply even just uncheck that. And here again, we see all of our 10 codes. What's really cool about the way Medisoft has made this tool now is we have, of course, the ICD-10 code on the left with the description, but at the right, we have the equivalent existing ICD-9 code, which is really helpful for if we're familiar with the old codes, but not yet familiar with the new codes. One thing we've been training people on that we found is really helpful. Say, for example, you know what the existing 9 code is and need to look up what the new 10 code should be. Well, one thing you can do, you can come into this list we have here after you've gone through that creation portion that we already did. We can type in the 9 code we know of, 034.0, and you're going to notice it's going to bring up the old code that we had created, no doubt, ourselves in Medisoft. And then it'll bring up the new 10 codes for us to be able to use and reference. And this is really nice, again, because this code has multiple 10 codes it brought up both of those. And to have this set up in your software, you want to make sure that the field over here to the right is set to ICD-9. For whatever reason, Medisoft, I believe by default, has this set to code. And for this search to work right, you want it to say ICD-9 here. Then whatever you type in here, it'll bring in the 10 codes, various 10 codes that apply. So that's how we get the 10 codes in the software. I just want to show you now what you need to do once you have the codes in the program. You're still responsible in putting those codes into the correct areas so that it goes out on your claims. So I just want to walk through some of that briefly now. And I'm just going to open up transaction entry. And we'll pull up a sample patient. So what I'm going to do here, first of all, let's go into the patient's case. This is where many of you assign the diagnostic codes for a patient. And here, beginning with ICD-10, when that fully goes into effect, you of course are going to want to assign your 10 codes here. So if you don't know what they are, again, a nice helpful feature, we can click on this little magnifying glass just to the right of the code. And when I click that, it brings up that same similar search window we were just in from our diagnostic code list. And we could, again, type in the code we're familiar with, for example, 034.0, and it'll bring up not only the original 9 code, but the 10 codes as well, just below that for us to look at or enter in. So we say, yep, this one looks good. I can hit OK. And now that one has been put into Medisoft for me. So it kind of helps ease the pain in trying to familiarize yourself with all those codes. We can do a nice lookup. So that applies here, and it also applies, I know some of you may not use this window, but you might actually assign the code on the transaction line. So we can do the same thing. You can actually right-click in the diagnostic code boxes here and say search for diagnosis, or press F6 on your keyboard. So I'm just going to click search diagnosis. Again, we get the same window. We can search for that, choose the correct diagnostic code, the 10 code we want, and hit OK. And we'll notice here it put that in now for us. So that's a really huge help, being able to help practices get ready and prepped for ICD-10. There's one other tool that we'd also like to go over, and it's considered the insurance carrier configuration tool. And what this tool does, technically, it really helps us to give a warning. You might have even seen part of this warning where this one code is in glowing red here under this column. So what we can do here is say ICD-10 goes into effect, and you go to bill out your codes, but maybe by mistake you entered in a 9 code instead of a 10 code that should have been there. Well, Medisoft has a way of alerting or notifying the user to make sure they don't send the wrong code on the claim. So that's what I want to show you now. I'm going to close out of here. We'll come back to this area in a second. Again, this is under the Tools menu, Services, and now we're going to be under Set ICD Version. Tools, Services, and then Set ICD Version here. What this does now, it's going to bring up a list of all of our insurance carriers, and it allows us to easily configure the insurance carriers to either send out ICD-9 type codes or ICD-10 type codes. And again, if we try to do something different than what the carrier is set to, Medisoft is going to give us a flag or a warning, which will be helpful. So for example, many of you that come in here for the first time, you might see that currently, I'm just going to switch it back here from what mine is at. You might see all of your insurance carriers are set to ICD, the code set ICD-9 here. If when you actually hear of the official date for ICD-10 to go into effect, we're not 100% sure yet, but it's looking like October. Once we know of that date, you're going to want to come into this tool and set up your carriers. So we're just going to pretend October 1st is the date. What you're going to want to do is come in here. We're going to check this top code set checkbox. And we're going to say, yes, switch our codes to ICD-10 with an effective date, which we mark below by checking the box. And then putting in the date we want this to take effect, essentially, for dates of service that we want this to take effect. So we'll just say, yeah, for dates of service starting October 1st. This is most likely what many of you will do. So once we've done that, we're going to say we want to apply this to all of our insurance carriers. So I'm going to say click the Select All button and then Update Selected. And you're going to notice this is going to change all of our carriers here to essentially expect an ICD-10 code to be sent out on the claim beginning October 1st. Now, just to show you what this does, if say someone by mistake does something other than what they should, perhaps ICD-10 is in full effect, but someone tries to accidentally send a 9 code out, I'll just show you some of the checks and balances, the warnings that Medisoft can give you. So let me actually first of all show you what that tool modifies in the insurance carrier window. It mass applies it to all the carriers at once, but let me just show you what happens on a carrier by carrier basis. So if we go into List Insurance Carriers, and we'll just pick on Medicare here. I'm just going to open up that carrier. And if we go under the Options and Codes tab, this is essentially what that tool modifies. You're going to notice this Diagnosis Code Set and Effective Date fields. It originally was set to ICD-9. So that tool essentially switched it to ICD-10 for us and put in that effective date. We're going to pretend that ICD-10 is in effect now. And so I'll just mark it. We'll just say yesterday it took effect for Medicare. So let's see what happens on the transaction line now that we have this. So I'm just going to open up a patient. And you're going to notice I put in a charge, a date of service of today, and we did mark Medicare to be supposed to be in ICD-10 sending as of yesterday. So you're going to notice Medisoft here, it detects, hey, there's a 9 code for this patient when I should be sending out ICD-10. So it actually glows red, the diagnostic codes. In fact, if I were to, I'll show you what it looks like even if before you create the code, they come up red. If I try to save it, it's going to give me another warning here as well, saying that these codes don't match what the insurance carrier is currently set to. So someone would actually have to hit yes, I want to still do this to get around that, which is a really nice feature to kind of prevent the wrong claim from going out. Even further than that, if somehow this passes through that and gets to the claim process, if I go to create a claim like that has the incorrect codes on it, you're going to notice the claim here that I just created comes through with DX error. So because it's not in the ready to send status, it will not go out on our next batch of claims. So the biller could actually double click on this claim line in claim management, could look under transactions and see what the problem is. Again, our diagnostic codes are glowing red when they're usually black. So again, some other nice features to help us prevent us from sending out the wrong codes. So those are going to be that's going to be really helpful as we prep and begin using ICD-10. Now, many of you have asked us questions about testing beforehand. So you'll want to contact your clearinghouses, your electronic clearinghouses about that. And many do want to test ahead of time. And if that's the case, what we recommend doing is kind of what I just showed you. You're going to want to go into your insurance carrier or carriers that you're going to test with and manually manipulate that carrier. So I'm going to, we'll go into one of them here by opening them up. Under the Options and Codes tab, we can tell Medisoft to send ICD-10 and just switch the effective date to the current day. That way, Medisoft will let you send out that code without giving you any errors or problems. And you can test that out. So you can actually set that patient up on the transaction line, put in the actual 10 codes, and build them out. Once you're done with that testing phase, come back in here and, of course, switch this back to either ICD-9 or push back out that ICD-10 date back to October, like it's expected to be. That way you can get the codes out on your claims for testing, and hopefully that goes through with your clearinghouses and insurance carriers. Of course, now's the time to prepare. If we have the software that supports everything with ICD-10, and it seems like it's going to work really well and help people out in moving over to ICD-10. So those are the main configuration things that we wanted to go over with you all today. And of course, we're kind of at the end of it. Wanted to ask if any had any questions, either for myself. Otherwise, of course, we also have Kay Warden can answer questions too on specific ICD questions. So feel free to unmute your line if there are any questions. And again, if you're looking to unmute your line, you should be able to scroll your mouse at the bottom, and it'll bring up that little bar, and you can unclick that little microphone icon with the red slash through it. And that should unmute your line if you like. All right, I don't think we have any questions. What I'm going to throw up here is my contact information, both Randy and mine. And here you can give us a call if you have any questions. You can also email if you're curious about upgrades or questions, pricing, stuff like that. You can give Randy a shout out at his email address there. Or you can even email me. Many of you have that. My email address down there below as well. So I'll leave this up for some of you if you want to take a look at this before you end the call. One last chance. Any other questions out there? All right, wonderful. All right, like I said, I'll leave this up, and feel free to let us know if you have any future questions at that time. All right, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of the day.